Hey everybody, wow, I gotta move over there. Welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed, the television edition. I'm your host, Matt Connarton. Wonderful to have you with me. So first of all, I do want to say happy birthday to my good friend TJ Williams. It's his birthday today. TJ is my token black friend, so I'm just kidding. Well, no, he is, but we got a lot of stuff to get to. A lot going on in terms of the perpetual war that we're stuck in and all that. I do want to say, first of all, I want to start with by saying thank you. I found out last night, of course, there's two versions of the show. This is the TV edition, and there's also the radio edition of the show, which runs Thursday nights at dkrn.fm live, so you can listen tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern. And on the, I found out last night that as far as dkrn.fm goes, and I honestly, I had no idea that this was the case. I knew that we were doing well, and that as the station continues to grow, as DKRN continues to grow, the show continues to grow and gain a larger and larger audience. What I didn't know until last night is that the MCU radio edition is actually the number 2 show now on DKRN.FM. So, I knew we had a following, and I knew a lot of people had followed us there because the show has been around for a few years, the radio edition. It predates going to DKRN last fall. But I had no idea we were doing as well as we are. So as I get more involved in not only hosting there, but involved in the management aspect of the station, I'm starting to, I have access to some information that I didn't have before. And we're not quite number 1. Number 1 is Joe Crawford, the Joe Crawford Show, or actually the Joe Show officially is the name of it. So we're coming for you, Joe Crawford, but actually it's got a long way to go to catch up with Joe. Joe is really the kind of the big, the marquee name at DKRN. He's, God, my hair's getting so long. I should probably get it cut because, when I first started growing it out, people were complimenting me on it because they hadn't seen me with long hair in a really long time. But it's gotten to the point now where no one's really complimenting me on it. Now they're just kind of commenting, like Glenn said before I came on the air, oh, your hair's getting really long. But it's been a few weeks since anyone said, wow, your hair looks really good. So maybe it's time to cut it now that summer's over. Now that the weather's turning cold, I'll go back to having short hair. Makes sense, huh? But I did want to say thank you to everybody who listens to the radio edition and who's helped make it so successful on DKRN.FM. I don't know one thing that's very difficult to figure out, without doing all kinds of research and surveys and all that, which will probably never happen. But I don't know how many people who watch the television edition also listen to the radio edition and vice versa. But assuming that it is some of the same people, if you're one of those people, thank you. And I'm not telling you this to brag or boast or anything. I just, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to tell with me, with my sense of humor being the way it is. But I am very, gratitude is very important. And I am very grateful to all the support and everyone who both watches and listens to the show. So thank you. Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, dkrn.fm. And, by the way, you can listen on your mobile device, dkrn.fm/mobile. And we're really proud of the fact that, unlike other internet stations, you don't have to download an app or anything to listen on your mobile device. It's specifically designed to be extremely simple. You can, on your screen, when you go to that domain, the big play button pops up and you just click that, and that's literally all you have to do. So if you're driving along in your car, you got your mobile device plugged in, because this is how people listen to internet radio now in the car. It's becoming, as common as people listening to FM radio, plug in your mobile device in the car, listen to a podcast or some live streaming content or whatever it may be. It's actually taken a bite out of the satellite radio. The satellite radio sector of the broadcasting industry. But, dkrn.fm/mobile. And it's very, very easy. So again, thank you. And we will. Oh, you know what the other thing was I wanted to say about that? I'm sorry, I knew there was one other thing. For anyone who doesn't know, the radio edition of the show is all original content. I've had a couple of exchanges with people who didn't realize, who've told me that they specifically don't listen to the radio edition only because they watch the TV edition and then they assumed that the radio edition is just an audio-only rebroadcast of this, and it's not. If you really pay attention, very often at the end of this show, I'll say, okay, here's what we didn't get to today, so we'll continue this discussion tomorrow night on the radio edition. So it's all new content. So effectively, you get 2 hours of this program every week. Plus the other show that I do, the Matt Connarton Show, which is Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on DKRN.FM. So I've given you plenty of information to try to remember. All right, so I think what we'll open with is this will be, I think, installment number 518 in our indefinite long-running series, Republicans Say the Darndest Things. I saw this on HuffPost, and then we'll get to some... I'm not sure what else we'll get to. I'm going to play it by ear. I like to wing it. It's more exciting. We can't avoid our further military involvement in things we should probably learn to stay out of. But so there will be some of that today. By the way, too, before we get into this, I should mention, if you're watching us live on Wednesday, there's going to be a lot of politics today. We're going to do politics later on Norm and Friends. I will be a guest on there, along with the Honorable John Burt, and we'll be talking some politics. And Glenn even said he might come on, too. It still sounds strange after 7 years as Norm's co-host to say, I'm going to be a guest on the show. Somebody asked me last night, why do you, you were there for 7 years as Norm's co-host, and now it seems like you're going on all the time as a guest. It's like you never left. And I said, well, I like to think of it this way. I'm kind of like herpes. You can suppress me with medication, but never truly be rid of me. So, and I take a lot of pride in that. Wow, I actually said that. Okay, so, and then of course, rock, paper, hand grenades later too. I think the Honorable Gary S. Hopper is going to shapeshift again this week, but we'll see. This guy, Crescent, I guess is his name. Cresent. Those southern names, I'll tell you. Crescent Hardy, actually he's from Nevada, Southwest. Crescent Hardy, Nevada GOP candidate, says Mitt Romney was right about the 47%. So this went up early this morning on HuffPost. Ed Maz is the author. Says here, a Republican candidate running for Congress in Nevada says former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney was right when he made his controversial 47% remarks. Hardy, a state assemblyman, said in a video posted online by the Nevada State Democratic Party, he said, quote, "Can I say that without getting in trouble like Governor Romney? The 47% is true. It's bigger now," unquote. During the 2012 presidential campaign, a secretly recorded video from a private fundraiser caught Romney declaring that 47% of the electorate, quote, would vote for the president no matter what. There are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they are victims, who believe the government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they are entitled to health care, to food, to housing, you name it, unquote. He said, according to the video released by Mother Jones, quote, that's an entitlement and that government should give it to them. And they will vote for this president no matter what. These are people who pay no income tax, unquote. Hardy is running against incumbent Representative Stephen Horsford, Democrat of Nevada, to represent District 4, which includes North Las Vegas. The Las Vegas Sun reports that Horsford is a heavy favorite to win re-election. So the guy who said this is probably expected to lose anyway. I just, we won't spend much time on this. This is obviously a very minor story, but it just, I would be curious to know, I mean, I'd like to interview this guy and just ask him whose idea that was to say that. If this was something that occurred to him, if it was a spur of the moment thing, or if this is an actual strategy employed by his campaign. Because I would love to be a fly on the wall for the conversation if this was, in fact, part of a strategy. I'd love to be in that room to hear someone pitch a campaign advisor or whomever, hey, here's an idea. Remember in 2012 when our party's nominee said something about the 47%, and it really kind of derailed his campaign, and some people even blame that moment as being what cost him the election. Remember that? Yeah, maybe you should say that too. Here, let's take this campaign and just run right over a cliff with it. And who knows, maybe at the bottom of the ravine is victory. I mean, why? Look, I've never worked a day in my life in politics. I've never held office. I've never run for office. I've never been a part of a political campaign. I've only doing commentary on politics like this. That's the extent of my involvement. And yet somehow I seem to know things. I seem to intuit things that people who do this stuff professionally don't seem to understand. How is it that I, with absolutely zero experience, can figure out? Maybe I just have more common sense than a lot of these people, but if someone says something that pretty much wrecks their campaign, doing the exact same thing they did probably is not a recipe for success. But this guy went ahead and said it. I have theories. You've heard me say them before, that some of these folks just seem to lack any sort of self-awareness. So this kind of thing just doesn't occur to them. And also, too, I think that the modern Republican Party has made a decision, not necessarily a conscious decision, but sort of a tacit decision among them that they are not interested. They have zero interest in reaching out to anyone outside of their base. They are only interested in mobilizing and energizing the base. And this kind of talk does that. It energizes and mobilizes the base. People, conservatives who, we already know they're going to vote, they like to hear that kind of stuff. And we have a Republican Party that, post-2012, there were a lot of strategists, a lot of people saying, Republican strategists saying, yeah, we kind of blew it because, with the rise of the Tea Party and so forth, we've only been interested in appealing to the base and mobilizing the base, and we need to be a big tent party. You never hear that expression anymore, big tent, but, and we need to reach out to some Democrats. Remember the Reagan Democrats? And we need to reach out to independents. And there was all this kind of talk in the 2012 postmortem. And then they turned around and those were their words, but their actions suggest that of a party that isn't interested in any of that. And as much as I disagree with most of it, I will admit this, that on some level, it's sort of honorable, when someone decides that, sure, I want to win, I want victory, but it's even more important to me to stick by my principles, no matter how unelectable they may make me. So I don't want to back down from my principles. I don't want to retreat from any of that, what I believe in, my core beliefs. So I'm going to continue to espouse them, no matter how much of a turnoff they may be to some people. And if that causes me to lose, so be it. There is something sort of honorable in that. It's one of as much as I dislike the Tea Party and I think they're dangerous, one of the things that I will actually give them respect for is at least, they'll tell you. I mean, guys like, I always go to this example because it's an easy one, but guys like Todd Legitimate Rape Aiken, remember him? He'll tell you exactly what he thinks, regardless of how much members of his own party, establishment conservatives, get upset with him for blowing an election that he could have possibly won. But that's kind of the attitude. We're going to, with the Tea Partiers, we're going to tell you exactly what we think. If you don't like it, don't vote for us. But It is what it is. There is something to respect in that. You can't help but respect their honesty. But this is not a winning strategy. Now, and maybe, again, too, according to the article, he's expected to lose anyway. So maybe he just figured he has nothing to lose. So he'll say whatever he wants. But this kind of thing just keeps popping up. These people just, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what it is. If they just lack the self-awareness to realize what they're saying, or because what goes on in somebody's head, unless he just really doesn't care, what goes on in his mind that says, because he acknowledges, I know I said we were moving on and here I am stuck on this, but it just baffles me. He acknowledges in his comments that this caused a great deal of trouble for Mitt Romney. He acknowledges that. And then proceeds to say it anyway. Maybe he thinks the base will see that as being courageous. And they'll say, oh, we got to get behind this guy. And they'll come out and they'll vote for him and he'll score an upset victory. I don't know. I don't know what goes on in the minds of these people. We gotta. I don't want to spend the rest of the show on this, so I'm gonna really try not to. But let me tell you what I'm thinking about ISIS, ISIL, the IS, whatever you want to call them. At this point, we have. I feel that we have as a country two options in how we proceed in terms of our policy in the Middle East. And one of them is irrelevant, one of the two options, because we've certainly already chosen what we're going to do. And what it is, and I said this either last week or the week before, is we have chosen perpetual war. We have chosen endless war. Ron Paul warned about this. He uses those terms, endless war, perpetual war, generational war. It's what we chose when Bush and Cheney made the decision to destabilize Iraq by removing Saddam Hussein. And that creates a vacuum, and the vacuum is filled by Islamic fundamentalism. We saw in Libya, you get rid of Muammar Gaddafi. This whole Arab Spring thing, it kind of, again, something where there's a vacuum, something will fill it. In Syria, if we eliminate Assad, and it gets tricky, this stuff gets tricky because when you're talking about Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein or Sadat, these are people who deserve to be eliminated in one sense because they're bad guys. But when you eliminate these people, when you eliminate these dictators, something worse springs up. Bush told us when he was running for president in 2000 he wasn't interested in nation building. Well, he was right, because nation building doesn't work. But what we do instead is, I guess he was telling the truth, because we really haven't done a lot of nation building. Instead, we go in, we wreck the place. We don't go in, wreck the place, and leave. We go in, wreck the place, and stay for years. But then eventually when we leave, what would have happened whenever we decided to leave begins to happen. The IS, Islamic fundamentalism, fills that void, fills that vacuum that we created. So when we completely destabilized everything over there by getting rid of Saddam, that was the beginning of our slide into endless, generational, perpetual war. And like I said, we're stuck now. We are completely stuck. We are never getting out of this. We can degrade and what are the words that Obama uses? Degrade and dismantle, I think. We can do that all we want to ISIS. We can continue to bomb them, no troops on the ground. Come on. We already have advisors over there. And I'm going to tell you something. Here's a couple things to be aware of and very suspicious of. First of all, when Obama said initially, before the bombing even started, we're sending advisors to help prop up whoever is there already fighting the IS, whether it's whatever's left of the Iraqi army, who all dropped their weapons and ran, and then the IS picked them up. They have weapons that we gave to the Iraqi army. Isn't that nice? Or, whether it's these alleged moderate Syrian rebels who are going to fight this war for us on the ground. We'll handle the air. They'll handle the ground. Obama said, we're sending in advisors. Military advisors to advise, again, whatever's left of the Iraqi army and whoever else is going to fight this ground war for us, supposedly. First of all, those, maybe those aren't combat troops technically, these advisors who are supposed to only be advising, but there's something that people might not realize. When we got into Vietnam, from which we apparently learned not one single damn thing, or did we, depending on what you think our motives are, our true motives are for what we're doing now. You know how that began? That began with advisors. JFK said, we're going to send in some advisors. That was the word. Military advisors to advise the South Vietnamese on how to fight off the North Vietnamese. Got to fight those commies. And those advisors, and anyone who's ever watched a documentary or read a book on the Vietnam War knows this already. So, and I know I have a smart audience, and most of you probably already know this. But in case you don't, or in case you just need to be reminded, those advisors very rapidly ended up fighting. They weren't supposed to be combat troops. They were advisors. They're there to advise. But the South Vietnamese were not prepared to fight this battle or even be advised adequately on how to fight this battle. So next thing you know, guess who's fighting? The advisors. But there's all these games played with semantics with this stuff to make us think that we're not actually at war. This isn't a war. It's a military operation, or it's part of the larger war on terror, which we have all become so desensitized to hearing that phrase, war on terror, that we don't even notice anymore that one of the three words in war on terror is war. But the semantics are important, because it's important to know what they mean when they say advisors. Just like it's important to know that when Obama says we need congressional authorization to so that our military can begin arming these alleged moderate Syrian rebels, and how we figure out who the moderate Syrian rebels are, I have no idea. The moderate Syrian rebels versus the hardline Syrian rebels, or the Islamic fundamentalist Syrian rebels, or whatever. How we identify these people, I have no clue. And then how we make sure that these people don't drop their weapons and run like the Iraqi army did, we effectively have armed the IS. We armed them. They have our weapons that we gave to the Iraqi army, which just makes me nuts. But when Obama talks about we need congressional approval, which he was able to get, Congress voted. It was a kind of a nonpartisan deal. Both Democrats and Republicans voted for and against the measure. This was already happening. We've already been arming, and this isn't something you're going to find if you poke around some websites where they report things that you won't find in the mainstream media. This just hasn't been talked about very much, but it is out there and fully verified. We've already been doing it. It just hasn't been the military doing it. It was the CIA. See, that's how they get around that. So when Obama says we need congressional approval so that we can begin arming the moderate Syrian rebels, what he really means is we need congressional approval so that I can order the military to start doing it. Because having the CIA do it, the CIA has to operate undercover and act like, oh, nothing to see here. We're the CIA. Everything we do is a secret. Now, it's kind of a hassle keeping this a secret. But they've already been doing it. They've been doing it for months. They've already been preparing for this. We've already been engaged in this war. And don't let anybody tell you it's not war. We have bombing is still war. Those pilots, out of respect for those pilots who are flying and bombing, it is an insult to them to pretend that this is not war. They are in danger. They are in danger of being shot down. They're flying these missions, dodging anti-aircraft gunfire coming in. They are risking their lives, and we're supposed to pretend that we're not at war. Of course, we get around that too semantically because we don't actually declare war. When was the last declared war? Was it World War II? We never declared war in Korea. We never declared war in Vietnam. I don't think we declared war for the first Gulf War. I remember the wrangling. I still remember the wrangling over that. Whether Bush 41 had the power as commander-in-chief to order troops into battle, or if he needed congressional approval because only Congress can declare war. But I don't think we ever actually declared war there either. I don't think we've declared war since World War II. I'm not positive about that. If anyone's watching live who wants to call in and who knows for sure, let me know. But I think that's the case. Because I know we didn't declare war in Korea. I don't think we have since. But we have two options. And they're both terrible. One is we accept, let's all be adults and just accept that we are stuck and will be stuck forever. Because this will never, ever end. Islamic fundamentalism is never going to go away. I said it before. If I live to be 100 years old, on the day that I die, we'll still be engaged in war in the Middle East. Once we took out Saddam, that was it. That was the beginning of our slide into a permanent state of war. Now, we do have a second option, which we will never actually take. But option number 2 is this. We finally see this for what it is, and we say, that's it. No more. We're getting out. And we're going to focus on protecting the homeland. And we're not going to buy into this BS that, well, if we don't fight them over there, we'll have to fight them over here. Because the reality is, we don't even know for certain what happens if we stop fighting them over there. Because we don't know where the tipping point is. I suspect we already passed it maybe decades ago. I don't know. The point where our actions begin to make things worse for ourselves, because this is clearly a cycle. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine once, this was maybe a year ago, who has had some interesting observations about Afghanistan and how, you know, there are kids growing up in Afghanistan now who weren't even alive when 9/11 happened, who learn to hate America because maybe a drone took out some of their family members, and they don't understand. They have no idea why America does this. Why do the Americans hate us? All they know is that America hates them. Not that Hamid Karzai, with comments that he's made, and we'll get to that, not that he's helped the situation, but these kids growing up with dead families because we killed their families, whether we thought they were suspected terrorists, so that had to be taken out with a drone strike, or whether they were collateral damage. A lot of civilians, a lot of innocent civilians die in war. It's a fact of war. But you got these generations now growing up who have no idea. All they know is America is apparently angry at them. They don't know anything about planes flying into buildings. They don't know. So it just creates this cycle of hate. Because we're getting ready to leave Afghanistan now. What's going to happen when we leave Afghanistan? See, I've never, just like, I said before, I've never held office. I've never worked a day of my life in politics, never worked on a campaign. I've also never worked in government. I have no foreign policy experience. Never been in the military. Never worked for the CIA. I have zero experience. And yet, I will tell you with absolute certainty that once we finally pack up and we're completely disengaged in Afghanistan, I know exactly what's going to happen there. And I have a pretty good track record of predicting this stuff because I knew exactly what was going to happen in Iraq when we finally packed up and left. I knew all this was going to happen. I didn't know how bad it was going to be, certainly. I didn't know that they were going to be beheading American journalists. But come on. All it takes is a little common sense to see how this is all going to go. And then the kinds of decisions that we're having to make about what to do in Iraq we'll be making about Afghanistan. It doesn't matter when we leave. Doesn't matter if we leave soon, which apparently we're fixing to do. Doesn't matter if Obama decides, if he changes his mind and decides to kick the can down the road and we'll leave it for a future president to get us out of there. And we'll just kind of stay for now while he runs out the clock. Doesn't matter if we left 3 years ago. The result will be the same. It's inevitable. Islamic fundamentalism will fill the vacuum that we leave when we go. And whose fault will it be? But we don't like to reflect on that too much because that gets uncomfortable. As Americans, we have a lot of pride. And, the moment you or I or anyone says, well, maybe we need to think about if any of this is our fault, if we've contributed to the problem, then you've got somebody saying, oh, you're one of them, you're part of the blame America first crowd, like everything's our fault. Well, maybe some things are our fault. That's not to say that everything's our fault. That's not to say blame America first, but to just pretend that our actions don't have consequences is not very smart. So I think a lot of this is our fault. I think, in a way, we created the IS. We certainly armed them, like I said. Just like I've heard it said that the Russians, unintentionally armed a lot of the Taliban in Afghanistan, because when we first went there, post 9/11, there was all this Russian military equipment there. Afghanistan, where great empires go to die. How'd that work out for the Russians? Glad we could go there and just make things inevitably worse. So what is the other option? The other option is we say enough. We're disengaging from the Middle East. I'm not saying that's a good option. Like I said, we have two choices. One is accept perpetual, endless generational war, which we have done, which is the decision. Or option two, we disengage, which is also terrible and will have terrible consequences for America. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that it's that simple. And I'm not an isolationist. I'm not an interventionist, but I'm not an isolationist either. I'm not completely comfortable with the idea of disengaging, but I think it's the better option. And I think in the long run, it would work out better for us. But we'll never do it. This country will never do it. We are the world's last remaining superpower. There's a lot of pride that comes with that. It makes for a nice bumper sticker to say, well, we can't be the world's policeman. But do we really believe that we can't be the world's policeman? No, we'll never truly accept that as a country, as a culture, as a society. So we will continue to engage. And that's it. Like I said, this will never be over. It'll have ebb and flow to it. I have no doubt we'll make progress beating down the IS. We have allies there who are helping us. That's great. If there's one tiny hope of a silver lining in all this, it's possible that this may help us. I'm skeptical that this will even happen, but I am an optimist by nature, so if I can find something positive here, I want to find it. It is possible. There's a sliver of a chance that we are able to take a step toward normalizing relations with Iran, because not that they're going to help us directly militarily fight the IS, but apparently this wasn't big news, but it was news. We gave Iran a heads up in terms of the bombing of Syria that, don't worry, we're not, this has nothing to do with you guys, basically, is what they were told, apparently. Secretly by U.S. intelligence. They were given a heads up. We're going to start bombing targets in Syria, but this has nothing to do with you. You and I are cool, basically. Not cool, but don't worry about what we're doing. So that's where we are. It's depressing. I mentioned Hamid Karzai. See, the other thing that's really frustrating about this kind of stuff, the nation building crap that never works out. I mean, look, you can't force someone. You can't say democratize while you're holding a gun on somebody. It doesn't work. Nation building really doesn't work. At least not in this part of the world. Maybe. There was Reconstruction after previous wars, but this isn't working for us. But in Hamid Karzai, you have a leader in Afghanistan, and I use that term very loosely, who never wanted us there, who was never grateful for our presence. And, we shouldn't have to. Let me put it this way. It has always pained me to when instances have arisen where the Obama administration had to negotiate with Karzai regarding renewing the status of forces agreement for us to be able to stay in Afghanistan. Because Karzai would kind of jerk the administration around very publicly, very flagrantly. And my attitude about it was, I would just cringe watching this. And I've always said, look, if he wants to complain, if Karzai wants to complain, if these people want to complain about us being there, it's time to pack up and go. Like I said, we know what's going to happen when we leave, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when we leave, it's going to happen. It's all going to come apart. But if he doesn't want us there, if they don't want us there, fine. We'll go home. We shouldn't tolerate them jerking us around. So if they're not happy with the situation, then it's time to go. And then I see this. This is from the New York Times. Rod Norland writes this. Hamid Karzai, the departing president of Afghanistan. See, he's on his way out as well. So he kind of took a parting shot at us. Lashed out at the U.S. in a farewell speech on Tuesday in Kabul. He's on his way out, so he has no accountability at this point. In his nearly 13 years as the leader of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai's most memorable public stances always seemed driven by some deep emotion and an almost compulsive need to express it. Not a very disciplined guy in terms of messaging. There was heartbreak for families killed by errant airstrikes, outrage at the scheming of hostile neighbors, palpable longing to preside over a peaceful end to the Taliban insurgency. On Tuesday, though, he delivered a farewell speech in a loose and sometimes jocular way There was, again, no doubt of the emotion that inspired his words. Bitterness at what he saw as an American betrayal of Afghanistan. He said, quote, America did not want peace for Afghanistan because it had its own agendas and goals here, unquote. He told an audience of hundreds of cabinet and staff members at the presidential palace in Kabul, warning them not to trust the Americans. He said, quote, I have always said this, that if America and Pakistan want peace, it is possible to bring peace to Afghanistan, unquote. Mr. Karzai's denunciation of the U.S. came in terms that had become wearily familiar to the diplomats watching the televised speech from the heavily fortified American embassy just a few blocks and many blast walls from the palace. But what the president did not say, omitting any recognition of the more than 2,000 American lives and hundreds of billions of dollars the United States expended in fighting the Taliban, may have grated more. God, those numbers. It's heartbreaking. Instead, Mr. Karzai pointedly praised the assistance of countries that had given notably less, like India. He did not mention the sacrifices of other Western allies, nor of his own security forces, who have lost an estimated 15,000 men killed in a war that seems unlikely to end soon. He said, quote, I want to thank those countries who genuinely supported us. Western countries had their personal interests. The Western countries and the United States had their own personal goal, unquote. This is the guy that we basically installed there. It's disgusting. But who do you blame? Well, we get ourselves into these situations. Oh, but we had to do something about 9/11. Well, then maybe we should have done something about who attacked us on 9/11. Did Afghanistan attack us? No, actually they didn't. Look, most of those hijackers, I've said this on the show before, but if you need to be reminded, most of the hijackers were Saudis. They were from the Wahhabi tribe in Saudi Arabia. We can't invade Saudi Arabia, so we invade Afghanistan and Iraq. The departing American ambassador, James B. Cunningham, dispensed with diplomatic niceties afterward, telling Western journalists that Mr. Karzai's remarks were ungrateful and ungracious. Well, what, are we surprised? This isn't a new thing from this guy, from Karzai. He's always been like this. Maybe not in the very, very beginning. But he's never wanted us there. He's never appreciated us. Cunningham said, quote, it makes me kind of sad. I think his remarks, which were uncalled for, do a disservice to the American people and dishonor the sacrifices that Americans have made here. By not recognizing the many contributions that Americans have made and our partners, that's the part that's ungracious and ungrateful. For all the difficulties in our relationship at various times, I think his legacy in terms of his country will be a strong one. He undoubtedly had one of the more difficult jobs in the world for a long period of time, and I'm convinced he really is an Afghan patriot who wants the best thing for his country, unquote. So Cunningham is taking a swipe at him over his remarks, but then kind of being very diplomatic with the rest of it. Shouldn't be. Why is anyone surprised? Again, I've never worked a day of my life in any of this, and yet I'm not surprised by any of it. Come on, we know the answer. It's the military-industrial complex. The conspiracy theorists are right. That really is what it's all about. I hate to say it, but though he is to cede the presidency to Ashraf Ghani at inauguration ceremonies on Monday, Mr. Karzai, 56, is not exactly retiring. Mr. Ghani said he would welcome some role as an advisor or emissary for Mr. Karzai. There's more to this, but it's just too frustrating to finish it. Why do we do this? Well, this is from the 17th. David Jaffe wrote this. I might have read part of this before, but let's just go to the first part of this quickly because it bears repeating. Because it's time we have an honest conversation in this country, something that we don't like to do. Prior to leaving the presidency in 1961, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a 5-star Army general, issued a warning to the American people about what he described as the military-industrial complex. His language was unusually blunt, cautioning against the immense military establishment wedded to the armaments industry and influencing the economic, political, and even spiritual life of the nation. The best defense, he believed, was an alert and knowledgeable citizenry. I know I've read that part to you before, but if we go, I think there's something later in the article that I wanted to hit that we didn't get to last time. Here it is. There's a little bit more to the Eisenhower quote. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. Unquote. That such a sentiment now seems quaint or naive is further testimony of how far the interests and priorities of the military-industrial complex have penetrated the American psyche. It is time to replace the ceaseless impulse toward military warfare with a reasoned commitment to human welfare. Let's be honest. That's the real reason for all this. See, I truly believe that the real reason we invaded the wrong countries, to put it very starkly and bluntly, post 9/11, because again, Iraq, I think the general consensus now on Iraq is a terrible mistake. There were no weapons of mass destruction. The neocons will still cling to the idea that was a good idea. But the lamest of excuses I've heard from neocons, I've actually heard people say this, well, we had to get the worst weapon of mass destruction of all, Saddam Hussein himself. He was a weapon of mass destruction. It's just terrible. I actually hear people say that, though. Apologists for what we did. Look, I truly believe now. See, my thinking has changed a little bit. I used to believe that Bush and Cheney, they were just arrogant. They thought it was going to be simple. Not that I don't still think they were arrogant, but they were arrogant in terms of they figured it would be easy, the invading Iraq in particular. They thought it was going to be easy. And actually, the invasion itself was easy. It was the occupation that was very difficult. And as things almost immediately began to come apart right after the invasion, after Bush stood on the deck of the USS Intrepid and announced to the world that combat operations have ceased, with that mission accomplished banner behind him. That part was easy, but the occupation was difficult. And we got bogged down. We started hearing words like quagmire, which Donald Rumsfeld was very offended by. At the time I thought, well, they were just arrogant. They got in over their heads. I thought at the time that Dick Cheney actually really thought when he said on Meet the Press that we'll be greeted as liberators, they'll be throwing flowers at us. At the time I thought he really believed that and just was too arrogant to understand that he was wrong. My thinking on that has evolved, and that I now believe that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew we were going to get bogged down, and they weren't concerned about it because war is a business. Like Dwight D. Eisenhower warned, his warning has come true. What he warned about has come true. His warning went unheeded, and this is what we have now. They finally got us there. They finally did it. Once they destabilized the region by getting rid of Saddam, that was the beginning of our descent into perpetual war. So the business of war will continue to thrive for generations to come. They did it. That's what I think the real reason was. And that is what Eisenhower tried to warn us about We have a little bit of time left. So quickly, I want to bring Rand Paul into this because, as regular viewers know, I'm fascinated by Rand Paul. I'm fascinated by how he tries to navigate the waters of what will be, I believe, his inevitable announcement that he is running for president for the Republican nomination. That is not in any way an endorsement of him. I want to be very clear about that. I know some people mistake my fascination with him or his sort of pseudo-campaigning as an endorsement. It is not. There are things about him that I like very much and have impressed me. But there are also some things about him that I find deeply concerning and disconcerting, and I am not prepared by any means to endorse him. But he is such an outlier in the Republican Party on many issues, particularly foreign policy. And I've talked about on the show how my dream match for 2016 is I want to see Rand Paul versus Hillary Clinton, because I just think it'll be fascinating to see a Republican who tends to be very anti-war versus a Democrat who's very hawkish and very pro-war, because it will be as though, in terms of foreign policy, they will have completely flipped roles. And I just think that would be, as a political junkie, I think that would be fascinating to watch. So I've been watching very closely as Rand Paul tries to, he's very libertarian. He's one of these Republicans he's not really a Republican. He's a libertarian, much more so than a traditional conservative. But unlike his dad, he's trying to find ways to reassure establishment conservatives that he really is a good option, while, of course, maintaining his libertarianism. But this popped up a few days ago because watching him, he sort of has been backed into a corner ideologically to be sort of not quite isolationist, but not quite but certainly not at all interventionist, is a very tricky wire to try to walk. But let's see. This says here, this is Beth Reinhard wrote this for the Wall Street Journal. Rand Paul adjusts foreign policy stance. Kentucky senator's position brings him more in line with GOP mainstream. He's kind of starting to fall in line here. And I kind of thought this would happen. I predicted this too, because there's so much fear-mongering going on with the IS that, if you look at polls, they've even managed to convince a very war-weary country and a very skeptical country that we have to do something about the IS, because if we don't fight them there, we're going to have to fight them here. They're going to be showing up on our shores ready to fight. They're going to be showing up with their razor blades trying to hijack our planes. But Rand Paul looks like he's starting to fall in line. I'll read this very quickly. It's short because we're almost out of time. In his earliest days in Congress, Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul staked out new territory for the GOP when he proposed cutting defense spending by 10% and eliminating foreign aid. A more restrained foreign policy is the true conservative foreign policy, he said in 2011. 3 years later, Mr. Paul is backing U.S. airstrikes against Islamic militants in Syria and Iraq, the first military action he's supported since winning election. He now wants to freeze foreign aid at $5 billion, keeping money flowing to Israel and restoring some of the defense cuts that he originally supported. Okay, so he's getting hawkish on defense, and this is a complete reversal in terms of foreign aid going to Israel, because in the past, he had advocated for stopping foreign aid completely, no more foreign aid, and then had to deny it because you cannot run for the president and not fully support Israel. You get labeled an anti-Semite. They've some on the right have done that pretty effectively to Obama, etc. They've been able to hurt him on that, not being tight with Netanyahu. So he's outright lied about that, saying publicly, no, I've never supported cutting aid to Israel. That's not true. He supported cutting all foreign aid. He said on the Senate floor, though, the other day, he said, ISIS is now a threat. Let's get on with destroying them. But make no mistake, arming Islamic rebels in Syria will only make it harder to destroy ISIS. So he's not fallen in line in terms of the arming the moderate rebels, although a lot of Republicans and Democrats oppose that. That has been effectively a nonpartisan part of the discussion. But he is falling in line in terms of, well, we've got to stamp out ISIS. There's more to this, but we're out of time, so we will wrap up. That'll do it for this week's television edition of Unleashed. Please don't forget, of course, tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern at DKRN.FM is the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. We will continue this discussion. I always say that we'll continue the discussion, and then something else happens between now and then that I end up discussing instead. But whatever, we'll take it as it comes, to quote the great Steve Winwood. Nobody probably even 5 minutes younger than me has any idea what I meant with that. Don't forget, too, if you're watching this live on Wednesday, later on I'll be lots of politics today, Norman Friends. And then on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, Gary is out this week, but I will be joined instead, filling in for Gary. I will be hosting with Jane Cormier. So that should be fun and, little variety. But Gary, if you're watching, love you, brother. Hope you're feeling better soon. And when I say brother, of course, I mean older brother. Much, 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 much older brother. Just kidding. Actually, I have no idea how old Gary is, to be honest. I don't think he's old enough to be my dad, though. So we'll go with brother. Maybe cousin? I don't know. Anyway, that's it. All right, I'm out. I'll be back in an hour, and I'll talk at y'all a little bit later. Thanks, everybody.